Receiving no other questions, there's already been a motion and a second on the bill. Madam Secretary, will you call the roll on HB 136 as amended by House Committee Sub that was adopted prior?
Representative Blanton. Representative Booker.
Very brief explanation, please.
Briefly, please.
I just want to commend all of my colleagues here for coming together to help push this once again. Eric, I want to say that you are not a mistake. Your testimony is not a mistake. You're here for a reason, and so am I, and I'm here to vote yes.
Representative Bratcher.
Can I shortly explain my vote?
Briefly, please.
You know, there's a lot of boxes, there's a lot of medicine in a doctor's toolbox, and a lot of it is dangerous. I don't see any reason to keep this out of there under a doctor's care, so I vote yes. Thank you.
Representative Cantrell.
Yes.
Representative Elliott.
Aye.
Representative Fisher.
Yes.
Representative Harris.
I'd like to explain my vote briefly.
Briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I vote yes, and as somebody who's never smoked a cigarette, never taken any kind of drug whatsoever, I see this as a useful tool in the toolbox, as previously said, for doctors, and an awesome option for people who don't want to be addicted to narcotics. I vote yes. Thank you.
Representative Hatton.
Briefly explain my vote, Mr. Chair.
Briefly. Thank you for using a different microphone.
Here, use this one. There you go.
Okay, how's that? So recognizing that compromises were made, that we've seen various iterations of this bill, and that changes might still be necessary as we try our best to craft the perfect bill, but also recognizing that there are sick and suffering Kentuckians, that there are PTSD sufferers, that there are epileptic Kentuckians, that there are opioid addicted Kentuckians. It's time that we join the 33 states that have already legalized medicinal marijuana, and the first one being 24 years ago. It's time. 90% of Kentuckians are asking for this legislation, and it's time that we listen to them. So for all of them, and for Eric Crawford in particular, it's time. My vote is yes.
Representative Hoover. Representative Kulkarni.
Briefly explain my vote.
Briefly.
I'd like to thank all the advocates, Mr. Crawford, and all the advocates in this room and the overflow room for their hard work and their many trips to Frankfurt to educate and raise awareness on this issue. I'd like to thank the sponsors of this bill. I think it's a good step. I do want to quickly point out that the prohibitions that we have on marijuana were put in place in the early 1900s, in no small part due to their association with Mexican migrants and the attitudes of this country towards them at that time, less to do with any medical detrimental impact of the actual plant. I think we do need more study, but I want to point that out. I am voting yes today, but I just wanted to make sure I also pointed out that I do share the concerns of Mr. Trigg and Mr. Carter that spoke here today with regard to it seems like the favoring of corporate interests over minority communities and small farmers in Kentucky. But I will vote yes for this bill. I think it's an important step. Thank you.
Representative Lee. Representative Lewis.
Explain my vote.
Briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I polled my district. This polled almost 90%. For that reason, I'm a yes. Thank you.
Representative Maddox.
Yes.
Representative Massey.
Explain my vote.
Briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate this being brought forward, and I have really thought a lot about this, and I'm committed to this discussion continuing on. I do thank Representative Mosier for talking about further studies. I think that certainly needs to happen. I too surveyed my district, and I think it was at 92%. But I do have some reservations. I have some reservations about us as legislators regulating medication. I do have some concerns from a dear person to me that is working in Ohio as a physician's assistant, and told me about how since they've passed it, she's seen more than one case of people become addicted to marijuana products. I'm just telling you, I hear that from people. Again, going to the same comments that were said earlier, whether you vote for or whether you vote against does not make you good or does not make you bad. It makes you a concerned person that is studying and wants the best for Kentuckians. And I, too, want the best for Kentuckians. So at least for now, my vote is a yes.
Representative McCoy,
Yes.
Representative Meeks,
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yes, please, briefly.
First of all, I want to thank everyone that has been an advocate for this issue. I have some ongoing concerns having to do with this bill, concerns having to do with people who are currently serving time, families that have been disrupted, communities that have been disrupted because of the war, the so-called war on drugs, and how this particular product has been a key cause for the devastation that we see in some families and some communities. I have a concern about the corporate interests that are at play currently as we speak, looking at trying to pass this legislation, which will choke small farmers in our state, even though we want this bill to help them. I have concern about how the young people in this community, in our state, could use this product as a gateway drug. So there are ongoing concerns, and I appreciate the fact that you all are continuing to take input, feedback, and we'll continue to tweak this as we move forward. I do vote yes.
Representative Mentor,
Briefly explain my vote.
Briefly.
I want to thank all of you for sharing your stories, particularly you, Eric, from here in this room to our offices to the doors in my district where support is overwhelmingly in favor of this bill. I also hear you, Mr. Trigg, about your concerns about small farmers. I think you're absolutely right. I hear you, Mr. Carter, about your concerns about the effect on communities of color. Absolutely. And this bill is too tight for my taste as well, as Representative Nemes said. But what it comes down to for me is this, that no one should be a criminal in our state for doing what they must do so that they or their families can live without pain and live in dignity. And for that reason, and for all of you who've shared your stories with me everywhere, thank you. This is an enthusiastic yes.
Representative Mosier,
If I could explain my vote quickly.
Briefly, please.
So I still have serious concerns about, and I think that we have a lot of questions that are still unanswered. And I just want to make sure that seriously ill patients get the appropriate treatment and care that they need and deserve. And I just want to make sure that they are getting the medication that they think they're getting. So I'm going to vote no today because I think we need more research. Thank you.
Representative Nemes,
5 seconds, Mr. Chairman. I've said a lot. I'm going to say one more thing, and that is,
Did you ask to explain your
may I
vote?
explain my vote, Mr. Chairman?
You may.
You can start the clock. This is not the bill that Jason Nemes wants, Representative Nemes wants. This is not the bill that Representative Sim wants. This is the bill that we can pass. We will continue to move it forward and try to improve it. But on behalf of those here, on behalf of so many who've told their stories, on behalf of thousands and thousands that I'll never meet, but who will benefit from this, I'm a strong yes, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Reed, Representative Sorolis,
I want to thank everybody for all the hard work on this bill. It is not our place as legislators to intervene in the relationship between physician and patient. Only they know what is best for themselves. This is not the bill I would have liked to have seen, but it is a start. And I'm happy to start. I'm a yes.
Representative Wiederstein,
Yes.
Chairman Petrie,
May I explain my vote briefly?
Briefly, Mr. Chairman.
One, I want to commend the sponsor and the prior sponsor and everybody that's been involved working on the bill. Tough issue, a difficult issue, a lot of different angles on it, a lot of different people involved. It's a complicated bill. You have this bill, this subject matter affects 3 or 4 of our committees in the House on subject matter.
No doubt.
So it is a complex and difficult animal to wrangle. But I do commend you on accommodating, working, thinking, trying to figure out, which I think everybody on this committee is trying to do, what's the best way to do a bill like this, learn from other people's mistakes and their successes, and how to get to something that is able to help someone and to be more than just one. And I understand some reservations about the tightness. I understand the reservations about waiving immunity or putting immunity in for certain things. I think they can be dealt with by floor amendment if necessary, and that's a if necessary. I think we have enough votes to pass it, and despite that, my vote's yes.
Nice to meet you. I'm very pleased for you. I'm happy for you.
Thank
You
you.
still gonna let me speak with Morgan?
We are not finished. Not finished.
So nice, sir. You're welcome.
Last pieces have to follow before we can finish it.
I was getting a hug from Mr. Crawford. I'm sorry.
I understand. Having received 17 yes votes, 1 no vote, House Bill 136 as amended is reported with favorable expression. That same should pass. We have a title amendment. I'll entertain a motion. I think I've heard the motion on the title. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Adopted. Adjourned.